accusers said about the alleged incident. This, as we also learned, the Santa Barbara authorities opened and closed an investigation into sexual abuse by Jackson after the alleged incidents occurred. Plus, that goes to the heart of the Michael Jackson case. Jackson's guilt or innocence. For the first time, we learn exactly what the alleged victim and his family said to Los Angeles social workers and later to a family psychiatrist, two very different and conflicting versions of events. Jackson's being prosecuted in Santa Barbara County, and we learn about Santa Barbara's own investigation that was opened and then closed. Before we talk about whether this puts a huge hole in the prosecution's case, NBC's Mike Taibbi has the explosive details.
When the controversial British documentary Living with Michael Jackson aired in the U.S. on February 6th last year, Beverly Hills psychiatrist Dr. Carol Lieberman was among a handful of child advocates who quickly fired off an outrage complaint.
I felt enough is enough. I just couldn't believe that the world was standing by and letting these children be potentially harmed.
On the day of the broadcast, Santa Barbara County District Attorney Tom Sneddon said what appeared on screen was no substitute for credible, cooperative victims, but later would dismiss as unimportant an early investigation by Los Angeles County that said allegations that Jackson abused his eventual accuser were unfounded.
To call that an investigation is a misnomer. It was an interview. Plain and simple, and that's all it was.
But you're about to hear why those charges were called unfounded, and NBC News can now report exclusively that just 2 weeks after that documentary aired, Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Department began its own official investigation of possible abuse by Michael Jackson of the alleged victim, and that Dr. Lieberman's letter of complaint was a key reason the probe was started.
It was February 18th last year. The investigation of suspected child abuse was given a case number and a daily report number. Producer Matt Carluccio and I spent hours transcribing portions of the documents and can reveal their contents for the very first time. One early entry from last March 10th, an account of an interview by 3 Los Angeles social workers of the accuser and his brother, sister, and mother at the apartment of the mother's boyfriend. From the accuser, then a 12-year-old cancer patient, Michael is like a father to me. He's never done anything to me sexually. And the boy never slept in bed with Michael, his mother always aware of what goes on in Neverland. From his mother, Michael is like a father to my children. He loves them, and I trust my children with him. She said Michael's kind and misunderstood, and an important part of her son's recovery from cancer. Sometimes, the mother said, her kids would be on Michael's bed, watching TV and eating s'mores. But as for the allegations that they share a bed, it is no. Her children were never solely alone with Jackson. There's always someone around. She said Michael has never been anything but wonderful. My children have never felt uncomfortable in his presence. Michael has been a blessing. The accuser's older sister, teary-eyed according to the report, adds Michael is so kind and loving. And the father, interviewed separately, says there's no reason to suspect any wrongdoing by Jackson, adding that he, too, attributed his son's recovery to Jackson. On April 16th, the Santa Barbara Sheriff's Department reached a conclusion. Based on the interviews with the children and their father, it was determined that the elements of criminal activity were not met. Therefore, this investigation was classified as a suspected sexual abuse incident report, with no further action required. Case closed. Case closed after a 2-month investigation that took place during much of the period when Jackson is said to have molested his accuser 7 times.
But the case wasn't closed. We learned that on June 13th last year, it was dramatically resumed when Santa Barbara's investigators heard, as NBC News is reporting for the first time, version number 2 of the story told by the accuser and his family in their own words. The family told this version of the story to psychologist Dr. Stan Katz. In the documents we reviewed, Katz told Santa Barbara's investigators the details. The records, quoting Katz, as saying, the accuser claimed he drank alcohol every night and got buzzed, whiskey, vodka, and Bacardi, and that when his head hurt from the drinking, Michael said, keep drinking, it will make it feel better. He said Michael showed him pictures of naked women on the computer, and that he once saw Michael just standing there, naked for a moment, and that Michael told him he, Michael, had to masturbate or he'd go crazy. According to the documents, Katz said the accuser's brother told him that on a flight back from Miami, he saw Michael licking the accuser's head as the boy slept against Michael's chest.
Michael provided wine, vodka, and tequila on numerous occasions, that one of Jackson's security guards told us he'd kill us and our parents if we told about the alcohol, and that Michael talked a lot about sex. He said he and his brother constantly sleep in Michael's room, with Michael and his brother in Michael's bed. He gave graphic details NBC News will not repeat about at least 2 incidents of inappropriate sexual touching initiated on the accuser by Michael. The documents quote Katz as saying the accuser's sister told him Michael gave her some wine and that she saw Michael kissing him on the cheek, hugging him, always rubbing him. According to the report, Katz said the family claimed about their earlier interviews they made them say Michael's a father figure. He's great. He'd never do anything bad. Katz said he believed the family was telling him the truth. I don't get the feeling the mom is lying about anything, though she may distort. I really felt the kids were credible.
Credible enough that molestation charges have been brought against Michael Jackson. But we now know the details of the 2 totally opposite stories told by the family for the record. And thus the question remains, which story to believe? The one about Michael as a loving father figure, a safe haven, a blessing. Or the one that describes a predator who plied his vulnerable young victim with alcohol and his own sexual obsession. Both stories, and any explanations, would surely be tested at a trial, which NBC News has been told won't begin until well into 2005, next year.
Wow. We tried contacting Santa Barbara authorities to get reaction to this report. They declined to comment. Let's bring in the man who broke this story, NBC's Mike Taibbi. Mike, what a report. Thanks very much for coming on the program. All right, one thing that you weren't able to include in that report that I think will help our viewers a lot is if you bring us through a timeline of exactly what happened when, to put it in some perspective.
All right, well, obviously the documentary was aired in this country for the first time on February 6th last year. That was the day Snedden made his statement about what you see on the air not being equivalent or a substitute for credible victims who are willing to come forward and tell their story. On February 7th, the alleged molestation began, or at least that's the beginning of the period that the charges describe as the period when the 7 acts of molestation allegedly took place. On February 14th, there was a joint investigation by the Department of Children and Family Services and the Los Angeles Police Department. That's the one that resulted in that unfounded charge. After that, on February 18th, began the Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Department investigation, as we specified. Then, after that, February 24th, the DCFS and LA probe ends with that finding of unfounded. March 10th is the period when the accuser and his family leave Neverland, so that is the period at the end of the section where the acts of molestation might have occurred. The next thing we then hear is on April 16th, when Santa Barbara, as we pointed out in that report, closed its case, saying that the elements of criminal activity had not been met. And it does say in the report, case closed. After that, as we report, on June 13th, that's when the Santa Barbara Sheriff's Department receives that call and for the first time hears officially of the story, the new story, the second version of the story being told by the accuser and his family. That's Dr. Katz's account of his interview with those family members.
All right, Mike, let's be clear about something. Did the Santa Barbara authorities actually interview all of the family members, or was their investigation based on the Los Angeles authorities' interviews?
That's a fair question. I thought we made that clear in the piece, that the interview of the accuser and his family that's included in this report was actually conducted by 3 Los Angeles social workers. Now, I don't know if that's the one that you referred to in your report last week involving the tapes, et cetera, but it was conducted by 3 Los Angeles social workers, and the supervisor of those 3 social workers, and we have all their names, called on the request of the Santa Barbara Sheriff's Department and reported verbatim, and it was taped, all the statements made by the accuser and his family.
All right, Mike Taibbi, if you could just stick around, I just want to read one more quote from Mike Taibbi's report. Dr. Katz talking about Michael Jackson. He doesn't really qualify as a pedophile. He's just a regressed 10-year-old. Mike Taibbi has now become the guy to beat on this story. Mike, stick around. Up next, can the prosecution recover from this? The whole family changing its story? Why would the DA have minimized the L.A. findings? And then we learn they relied on them as well. We'll ask the